Hi, you're watching Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Al Ewing, and I'm here to talk about Fury, Venom, X-Men Red, and many other things.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. I'm joined once again by one of our regular creators to the show, Mr. Al Ewing. How are you,
Hello,
mate?
hey, not too bad.
Good to see you again. Feels like it was only yesterday or seconds ago.
Yes, mere minutes ago.
We were talking on some of your recent appearances about what an incredibly fertile period of time you're having, how super
Yeah,
busy
there's
you
a
are,
lot on. There's
and
a
you,
lot going on right now.
and you really are. You really are. But I mean, the great thing about you, mate, you're super busy, but because of that perfectionistic streak of yours we talked about, it's all quality stuff. And I wanted to talk about some of your ongoing Marvel
Yeah,
books,
absolutely,
but
absolutely.
so you're doing very interesting work on Venom, very interesting work on X-Men Red, but you put out something recently that's one of my favourite books of the year, actually, about a character that I absolutely love. So you did that great Fury one shot,
Mm,
and before we talk about that, I saw you in some of the print interviews you'd done. I saw you making some really interesting comments, which I'd like to explore, which I do agree with, that came out of the, what do you think Fury's kind of
yeah,
legacy within the Marvel universe is as kind of a soldier and a super spy, and to kind of praise your answer. One of the things you said, well, as a comic book soldier, he's not a patch on Sergeant Rock, which I absolutely agree with.
I
Yeah,
mean, this is the thing. There are a lot of comic book soldiers, and generally you're talking about World War II there.
yeah,
Because if uh you have great, I'd argue that you have great comics about other wars. um Maybe not great kind of comic characters set in them. For instance, the Nam was a great
the
comic.
Nam was a great book. I
um
agree.
but it was an ensemble cast.
Yeah,
um and that was kind of the point of it. It was like, it didn't really it focused on people doing their tours of duty. um Now with Sergeant Fury, and his kind of opposite number across the aisle, Sergeant Rock, you've got this kind of this slightly fascinating kind of thing where Sergeant Rock, you can't really move him outside the
yeah,
war. I think Kanigher said something in an interview where, like, it's either Kanigher or it's somebody else, but I think it's Kanigher, that, like, he can't imagine, you know, Frank Rock outside the war.
it's 100% Kanigher, who in fact said that his vision of Rock is that he dies
Yeah,
on.
he dies at the last second of World War Two.
Yes,
He
absolutely
catches
right.
a stray bullet at the final
Yeah,
second of World War Two,
yeah,
just before peace is declared. And it's like, because yeah, he cannot exist outside of that war. In a, like, he's got a backstory, but it's so thin compared to his characterization, in any
yeah,
war story. It's like, at the same time, he's almost kind of a force of nature. He's sort of, whereas Fury is entirely outside World War Two. He's like,
yeah,
what he gets up to in World War Two seems almost to kind of, because it's in the mold of this kind of, um now, did Sergeant Fury come first? Because Sergeant Fury was,
no, Rock definitely came first.
Rock came first.
Yeah,
So,
because the Rock was
um
the star of our army at war,
right,
and
and that was 50s.
yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
very early '60s when Rock appears, or
right.
at the tail end of the '50s. But Rock's definitely there first.
He's the first to sort of assemble a company of characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Rock evolves like a kind of, he appears. The first story, Rock story, really is about because at this point, Our Army at War is short
Yeah, yeah,
stories, and
yeah,
he's a boxer turned soldier called The Rock,
yeah,
whose
yeah,
thing was you can't put him down in the ring. And again, on the field of war, he's the same thing. He's the
yeah, yeah.
kind of last man standing, and that kind
No,
of
I
became
remember
Frank
that,
Rock in
and
the end.
then he kind of becomes a steelworker, I think,
Correct, exactly right. Yeah, I think what's interesting about the
which is when Kanighan needs a different metaphor.
absolutely right. Man, there's so much to talk with you about this because first of all, I don't know if you ever saw it. There's a brilliant Len Wein story that that appeared as a backstory in a kind of in a DC like miniseries in the kind of the early
Yeah,
aughts.
yeah,
And I don't know if you've ever read it. The artwork's by Kubert. It's lovely, and it's basically all of the DC war characters getting together in the very early 70s, and in this sort of 8 page story, the losers are all still alive,
mm,
and Captain Storm is
yeah,
working in veteran affairs, and one of them's a senator, and Mamselle Marie, who is essentially Rock's girlfriend, turns up,
mm,
and there's a mysterious bartender who turns out to be the unknown soldier,
yeah, yeah,
and they're
yeah,
all coming together to remember Rock, who did indeed.
yeah,
Ween does the whole he died on the last second of
yeah,
the war, and right at the end, Mamselle Marie's like kid turns up, who's an American soldier, who looks exactly like Frank Rock.
yeah.
It's a beautiful little story.
See, that sounds great, and that kind of sounds like because they tried to do things with Fury where like the others, and it's less with Fury, it's more a kind of Black Hawk type thing.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely right.
but
Because it's
it's
essentially a
rather
superhero
rather than
book.
a gang of archetypes.
Yeah,
But they are all also archetypes. But like the it's you kind of you can sort of hold on to the fiction that Dino Manelli is Dean Martin.
yeah, right on.
Um, and so that's a pretty easy one. You've got what he did after the war that, but it's like you sort of end up with kind of people like Gabe Jones and Dum Dum, obviously. Dum Dum Dugan is like the king of these in that
Yeah,
people like Gabe and Dum Dum sort of awkwardly kind of shoehorned into Shield
yeah,
and
right.
not
Your Dum Dum
quite
turns up,
fitting.
Gabe turns up. Yeah,
And
absolutely
it's
right.
like it's like Dum Dum's the one who really doesn't fit, but he's also the second in command.
Yeah, but he
And
has such an iconic look as well, right? That's
yeah,
the
but he's got the derby hat and the thing, he's the strongman. He's basically Bulldozer, but it's like
yeah,
um and I feel like DC did a thing where Bulldozer was kind of um running the Suicide Squad at one point.
yeah. That's
Um
absolutely right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Correct. As and it was his bulldozer in a wheelchair, and also a version of Rock as well was in
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Man,
I can't remember how they squared that circle
no,
because
they didn't really. Oh, I tell you how they did it in
they
the
had
fight.
The Haney problem of like none of
Absolutely
these people
right.
have aged.
Absolutely right. Actually, what they did in the final issue of that book, it turns out that it's not really Rock and it's not really Bulldozer. And when the other members of the team happen upon the control room, all that's left are a pair of like Mission Impossible style masks, like left on the
Mm,
table. So you don't
yeah.
know who the hell they were. That's how they squared that circle.
I mean, that's a nice segue to the Secret Six, if nothing else.
Yeah, right
That's
on.
very
Yes.
that's a Secret Six gag.
Yeah.
But like to get back to Fury, it's like I feel like it's almost like the kind of the war stories are like what the price you have to pay to get all the other stuff.
Yes,
In that it's
absolutely.
like, Stan really comes alive with sort of Furious, the kind of post-war spy.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, especially doing all of the Man from Uncle stuff and like
Oh yeah.
but even it's much more interesting seeing Sergeant Fury pop up in Fantastic Four
Yes.
than it
Right
is
on.
seeing Reed Richards pop up in Sergeant Fury.
What 100? I couldn't agree more with what you said.
Because
I
Reed
guess.
Richards is just a dude.
Yeah.
But like Sergeant Fury is like it's really all the Fantastic Four are kind of like, oh, it's Sergeant Fury.
Yeah.
Wow, what's he
Yeah.
doing here?
What I think Fury was the first example of, the first real example of, is a character created in the modern Marvel age, or the
Yeah,
the DC Silver Age as also, whose life was told concurrently, like you would a literary character, where you see these exploits when he's in his 20s and these
yeah,
exploits
that
when he's
is.
in his 50s on the same track for years. It's really quite fascinating.
But that is fascinating. But he's like vastly more interesting when he's in his kind of
I
40s.
couldn't agree. I could not agree more. Yeah.
And it's like, well, and he's kind of breaking the mold of, and you know, how old would, because Jack would have definitely been in his 40s, but how old would Stan would have been?
Then I would say he was, yeah, because he was only a kid when he started at Timely, and he was only a kid when he started at Timely around what was around about
What I'm
1942,
what I'm getting at here is
late
Nick
30s, I would
Fury.
say.
Okay, well, is Nick Fury, the spy version, the only Marvel character who's the same age as his creators?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think absolutely right. Yeah, his life has been on the same span as them. Yes, for sure.
And
Yeah,
it's kind of because I remember going back and like reading just, and not for anything. This wasn't for the Fury book. This was just kind of at some point I had a spare afternoon and I was curious and I was kind of, but I remember like reading through a bunch of the Sergeant Furies, building like the whole team, and um, but there's this real sense of like when's he going to lose the eye?
yeah, right on. Yeah. Have
And
you read
it's
the issue where he gets the eye damage? Have you ever read that one?
because he gets it damaged, but it's like they've already kind of, it's like when Professor X loses the use of his legs. It's like there's that issue with the Juggernaut where it's like they have this really intense scene,
Yeah.
with like Professor X's evil half brother. It's like, yeah, this would be a really um intense and time for him to lose the use of his legs. If we hadn't already said that a, an alien pulled a lever and dropped a stone on him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I get the impression it's the same with Fury losing the eye. Like there's the issue where he gets the eye damage. The doctor says, "Oh well, at some point, you
You're going to
know,
lose the sight in this
you're
eye.
going to lose
Yeah.
the sight in that eye." But it's like because they've already told the story of him in the 50s
Yeah.
where he's got both his eyes.
Yeah. Right on. Absolutely.
They've already written themselves into that corner, and it's like,
Yeah.
and they keep doing that. I feel like there's, and so the retcon hadn't been invented yet. They didn't have the
Right
freedom, and Roy Thomas was like writing stories about like why Submariner is wearing this particular pair of
on.
pants.
Yeah. Right on.
It's like they didn't have the freedom at that point to just go, okay, you know what? Yeah, hell with it. We're you know, ignore everything up until this point. This is
Yeah.
when he's losing the eye.
I,
No
I,
prize it. Right in with a no prize to why that one in the 50s still works.
it is interesting, isn't it? In a way, just without devoting too much of this conversation to the World War II era Fury,
Yeah.
have you ever read the stories that are the later stories that are they come out on a bi-monthly or quarterly basis, and they're written by Gary Friedrich and um, they're drawn by
Yeah. Is it Severin? It's not.
yeah, it's drawn by John Severin.
John Severin.
Beautiful. I mean, a
Yeah.
great World War II artist, a great artist. And in fact, I think before you get to Steranko, I think probably the best two issues of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. from an art perspective is when it's Kirby inked by John Severin, and
Yeah,
that
you
looks
you're
really
really
beautiful.
you're really getting some amazing stuff
And
out of
that's
that
when you
brand.
see like the barbershop chair for the first time and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, because Kirby's really kind of having a ball with the uncle stuff.
Yeah,
Even
oh,
even when it
100%.
intrudes into kind of Captain America, it's always like, well, almost especially that it's like, well, how would I? Because Captain America's deal with Fury turns
Yeah,
up and like hands him a tiny brain, and it's
yeah.
like, what do you make of this? And it's like it's a small brain, and it's like, yeah, that's not something you would see
No.
on in a James Bond film or a Mount Bond film. It's something only Kirby could provide.
Because
Um,
he's doing Uncle, but he's
yeah,
making it so much better. He's
yeah,
given
he's
it all
making it
this
his own.
great Kirby paraphernalia for sure.
And then Steranko kind of takes that ball and runs with it
Yeah,
into a more kind of psychedelic pop art space.
yeah.
But like, and I mean, to get slightly back to the matter at hand, um, I the idea for the structure of the thing, I was thinking like, well, we've got four artists. It's going to be kind of we need to do 60s Fury and we need to do 40s Fury. And the 40s was one that gave me the real trouble because that's real world events that needed like a lot of research. Originally, it was going to be like set in Milan, and then it was like, okay, well, it turned out that Leonardo da Vinci spent his last years in France, which was a bit of a relief to be honest, because I know a bit more about the French side of World War II than I do about the Italian side. And it's like, but even then, there was a lot of sort of visual kind of, here's what the chateaus look like, here's what the Nazis were driving, here's their version of a Jeep. It's stuff like that. It's I don't have the kind of I don't have that sort of Garth Ennis brain where
Yeah,
I've
the
got
Garth Ennis
sheets
of
of
it
this
all.
stuff.
Yeah, wow.
Um it's so yeah, so that was tricky, but like, working with Adam Cuba, he just took all of my
Such a
very
great choice for some of the reasons we've touched upon.
took all of my very quite boring layouts in the scripts, and like he just made magic out of them. Absolutely beautiful. And it was weird because it was like, whereas with and I'm trying to remember whether I knew I was working with Tom Riley because I wrote the Steranko bit Marvel style,
Yeah,
in that I was like, don't worry about panels and panel borders because I want you to go Steranko and just not worry so much about it. At the same time, I was trying to get things in like the way they used to have, uh, the way the titles used to be laid out, the way they used to have kind of captions like running like
yeah.
over the top of a page wide image, kind of things like that that are very hard to translate now because how styles have shifted.
This, by the way, is one of the things I truly love about it, and I thought it was just for me so entertaining. Somebody who's lived through reading those books almost in real time, it was just a delight to read from that perspective.
Well, there were a few places where I kind of paid very deliberate tribute to that era. Obviously the modern Fury is just overloaded with gadgets. Everything is a gadget. Everything is
Sure.
like, but also I tried to do kind of my version of the classic Steranko, breaking into a building
Yeah.
with the title on it. Taking a lot of that stuff. Um, but it was like everybody every single person working on that just brought their all to it. It was wonderful seeing the pages take shape and come in, and like,
It looks to me like everybody's just having so much fun with it.
well, yeah, that was my worry though. I'd like because I was writing the scripts in like 10-page blocks, and I was sort of delivering them like week by week. But I was really worried that like somebody would not have as much fun with one of the things. But like, yeah, I mean, the one, like I said, the World War II one was the toughest one. That was one where I was like thinking like, well, who's going to be in it? Because in both those cases, I wanted to do things that were outside the continuity, kind of a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
In that, like the Steranko thing, the '60s one is like issue 19, and it's set in like 1968.
yeah.
And we play around a little bit with Marvel time in that, like, it's sort of there's a very like don't think about it too much thing with
Yeah,
Shield in that it's like yes, it was set up in the 60s because we like that era, we like the Man from Uncle of it all and the James Bond of it all. Too much to let that part go. Does that mean that Nick Fury, Agent of Shield, did that happen in 1963 or did that happen in like 19? Did that happen in 2004? It's like, well, we'll get back to you.
yeah, right on.
But it's like, I mean, I can't certainly all those Stracco issues with like issue one is so dependent on the casino and the
Yes,
Vegas and the Rat
yeah,
Pack of it all.
yeah.
It's like it doesn't function in a modern setting. It doesn't function in a modern time period.
It doesn't even function in the 10 years later. You know, it's got to be 1968. It's got to be in that period of time.
So like so by that rationale, I felt like, and I didn't have time to go back and like check through every issue of Nick Fury, Agent of Shield, just to in case like Daredevil guest starred or whatever,
Yeah,
because Daredevil has not yet been born.
yeah,
But like I felt, yeah, no, it's good to have to do like the 90th issue that never came out
yes, right on.
with the spacesuit from that cover that never got used in the actual story, and like and all this stuff, all of this kind of, and then have it. Okay, well, what happened in 1968? Well, the moon landing hadn't happened yet. Let's do a first man on the moon story, and we'll have it with like, and we still don't know who Scorpio is,
Yeah,
so we could do kind of. I forget if yeah. So I mean, it's a lot of fun. They kind of, but with the World War II thing, um, I was like, well, I want to do because I was looking through and kind of trying to find like, well, when's a good time to sort of set this, and it was like, well, actually, there's a sort of bit of continuity going spare after the Marvels projects, but before the Howling Commandos actually get together.
yeah.
So it's like,
I
and I
think
was thinking,
that's
well,
very true. Yeah,
I was going, well, who's Nick Fury teaming up with? Well, he's teaming up with the Sky Devils. And you go back and look at the Sky Devils. There are like three stories, and every single one of them is like, well, we're putting on the enemy uniforms. And
yeah, right on.
it's like, oh my god, no wonder there are so few Sky Devil
Yeah,
stories. They got shot.
yeah,
They got shot as a spy. So, we kind of I had some fun putting, and I doing it's a trick I've done before, but it's one I always get a sort of slightly transgressive kick out of, which is taking two completely different characters and having them be the same person.
yeah, yeah,
So, like, one of the Sky Devils is also the British guy that Fury met on his first thing.
yeah.
Um, but it's like because I love drawing little connections. I always love connecting things up like that. I kind of feel like it's just really fun to kind of just make patterns out of things that were never meant to be, joined together. I just get a kick out of that.
I think
It's
it's
fun.
it's an evident and joyful element of your work. I mean, the best tribute I could pay your Fury project, and I mean this utterly sincerely, mate, is my my best mate was my grandfather, and he's the guy who turned me on to comics, and he lived till a very very ripe old age. But his favorite character, his two favorite characters, because he lived through the war and served with an American unit, were Rock and Fury. But Rock was really his favorite character, but he loved Fury, but he particularly loved Fury as a spy. Yeah, so he read every Nick Fury come on. Of course, even up to the point where he like passed away, which is in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that was possible to do that because you basically you have your curb your Lee and Kirby, and you have your Steranko. Then you have essentially a fallow period after a few bits and pieces, and then you have your fallow period. Then you have that great like Marvel Spotlight issue, the Infinity
Yeah,
Formula, and
yeah.
he read all of that, so he would absolutely have loved this book.
Oh
I
well,
really had the sense when I was reading that I just wish he could read it. And, you could argue that on one level he probably
that's
has. He would have loved it, mate.
that's a huge compliment. That's an absolutely massive compliment. I mean, I am very glad to hear that because on one level I kind of conceived this as a potential last hurrah
Yeah,
for Nick Fury, in that it's like this wasn't part of the brief. It wasn't like it was more a case of me going like, well, because one thing I don't like about the convoluted nature of Nick Fury is that okay, we've introduced his son, and then we're sort of leaving his son on the shelf a little bit all the time because people are kind of still very much in love with the original Nick Fury. So you end up with this kind of weird situation where they're both on the shelf.
yeah,
In that sort of Nick Fury Jr. is kind of running around doing his stuff. Um, but like yeah, but people are like, oh well, he's not the real Nick Fury because the real Nick Fury, if you're listening to this and not watching, I'm doing air quotes around real. The real Nick Fury is like actually on the moon now, on a special shelf of his own. And it's like, yeah, well, that's um, wouldn't it be nice if I could somehow take them both off the shelf?
yeah,
And so I thought, well, let's put, Nick Fury Senior. Let's have him rampaging around other dimensions, doing fun stuff, and then he can be in like, what if World War II in space?
yeah,
He can do fun stuff like that, and then there's the one and only Nick Fury in the main Marvel universe is like Nick Fury Jr., which is a very cool concept. It's like I've always loved like, hero and son. And this goes back to like Frank Reed and like the really ancient pulp heroes and fictional heroes. And like you get stuff like Frank Reed and Frank Reed Jr. and like eventually like or Jack Harkaway. Like Jack Harkaway is replaced by his son, and then there's like Jack Harkaway the third.
yeah,
And it's like, obviously with Marvel time, introducing like Nick Fury the third is like asking for trouble, but it's where this should be going. It's like, look, Nick Fury Jr. should be the only Nick Fury because it's like that is how, I don't like that's how this goes. That's how this works. It's like, yeah, we all love Nick Fury Senior, but like back in the old days, they'd have shot him dead.
yeah,
They'd have thrown him off a cliff. They'd have had him buried in a rock slide on like the last page of some kind of like Penny Dreadful, and then like, yeah, next month, Nick Fury Jr. Boom. Okay, because the old one was getting too old, so we killed him. It's like, there's no like no sentimentality about these
no,
things
I agree.
back in the day.
It's like the old movie series, the Falcon, which is like the alternate version of the Saint. Once they lost the rights to the Saint, so
Oh man.
George Sanders just goes from playing the Saint to literally one film later playing the Falcon. Then when he gets bored with it, there's a whole movie which is the Falcon's brother, where he gets killed, and his George Sanders' real brother Tom Conway takes over as the Falcon, and then plays the Falcon in like 8 more films. Do you know what I
See,
mean? It's
that's
exactly that.
brilliant. That's brilliant. That's perfect. I mean, and it's like I'm sure I've said this before on this channel. I'm a child of the Wally West generation.
Yeah, right on.
So
Yeah,
I'm from a period where superheroes were being replaced by their sidekicks, all the time. Nobody batted an eyelid when Barry Allen died. It was an exciting comic. It was like, but like I was what, 7, 8, 9. I was, as a kid, it was like, oh, the Flash is dead. Wow, well, that's sounds pretty important. Who's this new Flash? He's more interesting. He's like, oh, I'm gonna get on board with this new Flash. Oh, who was he? The old-fashioned sidekick. Well, that's great. It was like, but the idea that, I should be hankering for Barry Allen to return. That was the biggest mistake DC ever made in my book, was bringing back Barry Allen. But like,
I couldn't agree more because Wally West had totally
not to
supplanted Barry Allen. He's
not
actually not
to
a
not
very
to denigrate any great comics by friends of
yeah
mine with
yeah.
Barry Allen in them.
But it's
I'm,
true though.
I'm
Wally West
merely
was
talking about the year of his return.
yeah right on. But he was such a. I think the thing is that between particularly between Wade and between Jeff Johns, they did such an amazing job with Wally West.
Yeah,
remember talking to Wade about this recently, and the reality is that every time you see Barry Allen in either the TV show or in the upcoming movie, yeah, he's called Barry Allen, but he's really Wally West.
yeah, he's got that Wally West energy.
Yeah,
It's like
for
he's a
sure.
young guy. He's a
Yeah,
young
he
guy.
is. Yeah,
But I mean, even Wally West like wasn't that young a guy. It was
no,
like I thought it was kind of interesting when they tried to replace him with Bart Allen.
yeah.
And I guess I didn't take, but like that was the noughties, it was like it was a dark time. But
But I
like
think the thing is, Bart Allen is such a great character in his own right, and Impulse is a
yeah,
character that conceptually you don't need to mess with. It's very well done, and so it was quite indelibly done. So trying to parlay him into being something
I,
else.
you could kind of say the same about like Wally West though, because Wally West, when he was Kid Flash, he didn't have quite as much personality, but he did have a personality, and his
Yeah,
personality was like a kind of young conservative asshole.
yeah, right on.
But like he carried that with him into like his early years, into the early Mike Baron years. He was very much this kind of very capitalist guy, and
Yeah,
that's why like even when Master Lives took over, he was like much more of a leftist writer. He was like
yeah,
Wally West was like sort of he was kind of the Hal Jordan in the Hal and Ollie relationship, but he was sort of um he had a personality. He had and it was and yeah, part of his personality was like what would Barry have done? Which is why Barry was so much better as a ghost.
I think that's absolutely right. Also, I love the fact that you've pulled out Baron and Messner Loebs, who I don't think get their due for what they contributed to the modern
I
incarnation
mean,
of the Flash.
I loved I love both of those. I love Messalines more, I think, because the run was longer, and that was when I
Yeah,
was getting right into it. That was when I kind of popped in, like in sort of mid periods Messalines. Immediately brought up all the back issues, it was like, which you could do at the time, they were like sitting in cardboard boxes in places if you knew where to look. But like got all the back issues. Picked up the Mike Baron ones for good measure. His style was much more sort of clipped,
he introduced the whole
almost
massive
Hemingway like
consumption
this.
thing, Baron.
Oh, that was great though. That
Yeah,
was like it was like a perfect metaphor for kind of Wally as a person, just this consumer.
yeah, right
But
on.
like but also just his style was kind of very sort of it was very clipped. It was like not a word wasted. um I was having a look back at Nexus recently, and it's the similar thing there. It's like not a but the thing where the kind of Vandal Savage turns up and it's just all business,
Yeah,
and
right
it's
on.
just like, again, very clip, very no big speeches, no big thing, just like at one point he just mentions, oh, at one point I had an extra finger bones, it was good magic, and it's just like, the kind of but yeah, no, but that brought in just such a wealth of ideas, those first 12 issues, just at a rush, and
100%.
it was very much this sort of people writing in the letters pages going like, oh, this is not a hero, how dare you? And it was
Yeah,
like it
right
needed
on.
it needed somebody to do that, somebody to kind of like do the thing of like, okay, what would this guy who's sort of a little bit of an asshole, but at the same, yes, he's sort of pulled in two directions, because it's, on the one hand, well, yeah, well, he is a little bit of, and it takes the whole Messalose run for him to kind of learn not to be. because like just at a very slow pace, just kind of ironically, to just kind of have him sort of learn to be a bit more of an empathetic human being. But like also there's this, that the Mike Byrne run is like this very stripped down kind of thing of like, okay, well on the one hand, he's kind of an asshole. On the other hand, wouldn't you be? If you had all of this power, him winning the lottery in issue 1 is like,
Yes, yeah,
it's kind of perfect in a way because it's just so matter of fact. But it does change the entire, and of course he just blows through it
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah,
because what else would he do? This is what it, and that just says, it's like it's such a smart. It was a really smart move. Just like take your character, just give him, just remove all financial hardship from him in issue 1. Just and then what does he do? How does he screw it up? And it's like, oh, like this.
so true.
Um, and it was just, yeah, the cojones to kind of to do that. It's like, I'm not saying that's what I do to Spider-Man have him win the lottery,
Yeah, but
but like,
it's
imagine if somebody
fascinating.
did that.
Yeah, I know, no, for
I
sure.
guess Dan did. Dan sort of did that. Dan had Spider-Man in charge of that giant company.
Yeah, no, he did. Yeah,
That
no,
was
that's
that was
true.
a kind of winning the lottery moment,
Yeah,
uh,
that's true.
in a
Well,
in a
that's a
Spider-Man-y
very
way.
Dan's run on Spider-Man is supremely and continues to be now supremely audacious. He's just
Yeah.
it's just like throwing away the rule book is what he does. Incidentally, when Baron was just coming off the Flash
Mhm.
years ago, he came to like UCAC. And I got him to sign, a couple of my Flash books. But the fascinating thing was because he's famously curmudgeonly. When kid version of me goes up to young like Baron, goes, "Could you sign the Flash book?" He was literally like, "He's. Have you ever fucking read Badger?" Well, yeah, I have. Yeah. Have you ever read Nexus? Yes. Oh, okay. I'll sign this stuff. And he's just like, "Oh, fuck, Flash."
I mean,
You know what I mean? It couldn't have cared less that I wanted to sign those books. It was fucking brilliant.
it's. I mean, it's. It. I think things were a little different. I guess it's sort of. I don't know. That might be part of the era. Like, I do, because generally, I'm happy to sign anything, but it's like, even stuff I haven't read.
Yeah.
If you want, if you want, if you bring it in front of me, I don't generally. No, that's a lie. I like, generally, if I know the person who's written it well, I'll sign it on their behalf. But like,
Yeah.
I you know, in that's a rare thing. But like, that's it's more of like just a gag thing.
Yeah,
But
right.
like, the um the thing when people bring like we only find them when they're dead, which we were talking about recently. That's always a very special moment when somebody brings
Oh,
that
it's
up.
got to be. Yeah, it's
It
got to
always
be.
means it always means a little bit more.
Yeah, well, that makes complete sense. Actually, I'm going to use this to pivot into talking about just for a little bit what I promised to talk about at the top of this episode and we
Yeah,
haven't covered,
yeah.
which is
Briefly.
if you could just briefly give us a hit on what's happening in your ongoing Venom series and what's happening in X-Men Red. What have we got to look forward to in both of those?
Um, Ongoing Venom series. Now we just had the return of Eddie Brock to um the main Marvel present day. He's not staying long.
Yeah.
Beyond that, we're coming up to Venom 25, which is going to be a multi-artist epic. Um,
And Al, is it solely you moving forward? Is Ram coming off the book?
yeah, Rams off the book, to pursue other projects, which
Yeah.
sound great. I don't know how many of them have been announced, so I won't say what they are.
Yeah, actually, he was
Um,
on talking about rare flavors the other day, which just sounds
oh, okay,
incredible. Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
But yeah, basically, yeah, he was telling me about that one in the pub, I think. But like, there was I'm doing a couple of Dylan issues because there was a sort of hot minute where I was going to take it all over, but then it became pretty clear that that was just a touch too far with my other work for me to handle. So we're bringing Torin Grumback, who
Nice.
I've kind of, it's sort of my first time kind of working directly with her, although we've sort of bumped shoulders on books and kind of obviously, I know her from like the UK scene,
Yeah, right
or
on.
I guess the European scene. But like but yeah, I've met her at Thought Bubble a few times. The whole Venom thing is very kind of the symbiote world is kind of a thing of many parts,
Yeah,
many
right.
moving parts. In that it sort of sprawls a little bit across the spider office. It's kind of reaches its tendrils into other places. I tend to keep my eye mostly on the two Venoms.
Yeah.
However, uh, they are at the center of a whole web, if you will, of symbiote stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on. And to be honest, I have no idea what's been announced and what hasn't been. So
I
I
think
will keep my mouth mostly shut.
well, I think that's very tantalising and a good place to move on to X-Men
Yeah.
Red and how that's going
Yeah,
for you.
X-Men Red I'm in a much surer position to talk about because we're just coming up to the Fall of X, which, I can't tell you exactly what that is. But I can say that, X-Men Red will be involved. We've been building up, if you've been reading Sins of Sinister, if you've been reading X-Men Red, you've been seeing that we're building up to a thing called the Genesis War, which may or may not have something to do with Apocalypse's wife, Genesis. And on that note, there's a special called Heralds of Apocalypse, which goes deep into the history of Araco and past and present, and the further still back into Akara and the kind of the coming of annihilation to Akara and that whole Great War. And obviously these are names that will have meaning if you've been following Krakoa era X-Men. If not, um it's a piece of the history. If you're an Apocalypse fan, it's a piece of the history of Apocalypse that you might not know about. It's a hint as to where he'll go next, and what he'll be doing when he gets there. And what else? What can I say that'll tease and tantalize? Apocalypse gets a new sidekick.
Brilliant. Okay,
So
fantastic.
there we go.
I think that's the ultimate tease on which to end this wide-ranging conversation. Everything we've talked about is available for order from forbiddenplanet.com, including your amazing Fury one-shot, including your whole ongoing Venom series, and including the ongoing X-Men Red series. And we've also squeezed in an epic conversation about the Flash from the Distinguished competition. All things very close to my heart, mate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll be honest, it's always a pleasure um, to just talk comics,
I couldn't.
unconnected to any kind of actual thing I've got coming out or need to be advertising. It's always nice just to kind of get into, comics history, especially of the 80s, comics history of the 80s when, I was much more able to buy every comic.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly wholeheartedly endorse every word of that, brother. It's always
Yeah,
great talking to you, Al, and I'll look forward to having you back on soon to talk about some
sure.
of your X Men
Anytime,
projects.
anytime.
Take care of yourself, brother.
All right.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.